The Halo series. Most of you see it as a really cool sci-fi first-person action shooter, but to me, there's underlying tones of religion, politics, sacrifice, and betrayal that really doesn't see the light of day when people talk about the story of Halo. That's gonna be the point of these videos, is gonna take a deep dive into the lore of the series and see how it could possibly connect to the story of Halo Infinite. Welcome back to the channel, guys. It's your boy Patman here, and I appreciate you guys coming by to check out this video. So let's talk about one of the main characters that will play a significant role in Halo Infinite. And no, I'm not talking about the Master Chief. I'm talking about Zeta Halo. This ring that we're supposedly going to be on, it's all but confirmed, has so much backstory and lore behind it, I just had to do its own video on it. And we all know why the Forerunners built these Halo rings, correct? It was to defeat the Flood, and the only way the Forerunners saw how to defeat them was to starve them to death. So the purpose of the Halo rings was to destroy all sentient life in a star system and as a whole array in the galaxy. But the Halo rings also had a secondary purpose, and it's quite ironic. A lot of the Halo rings, or installations as we'll call them, and by extension the arcs, had conservation measures put into them to basically repopulate the galaxy after the firing of the array. But we'll get more into that later. So let's start with the building of the original Halo array, which is not to be confused with the array of rings we see in the games. We'll touch base on that in a little bit. So a highly intelligent and prominent figure in the Forerunner Society named Faber, or the Master Builder, commissioned the assembling of the original Halo array after thousands of years of debate and opposition from the Didact. This original array consisted of 12 rings that were 30,000 kilometers in diameter and were assembled at the Greater Arc. An artificial intelligence was put in charge of these rings or installations, and his name was Mendicant Bias. Mendicant Bias was co-created by the Didact and Faber, who were friends but later became bitter enemies. You see, the Didact was opposed to the Halo array, and his idea of defeating the Flood was actually to build these shield worlds, much like we saw in Halo 4 Requiem. These shield worlds also served the purpose of repopulating the galaxy in case the firing of a Halo array, and they actually protected Forerunners from the firing of the Halo array, and supposedly hundreds of these were constructed, and they were known as, obviously, shields, and the Halo rings being the swords. So Zeta Halo was a part of this original array of 12 rings, and the Librarian, who is the Didact's wife we saw in Halo 4, was also against the construction of this array. To appease her wishes, the Forerunner Council granted her and her life workers the go-ahead of a plan called the Conservation Measure. This measure allowed them to take biological preserves for specimens of numerous species and conserve them on the Halo rings and the Ark as a way to repopulate the galaxy with life if the rings were ever fired. Faber authorized the use of these specimens as test subjects for the Flood in an attempt to find a cure. You see, each Halo ring had several Flood research facilities where the monitor of that installation, or the AI of that installation, would conduct experiments to try to find a cure. You see, Zeta Halo is one of the only installations to ever house ancient humans, and they were kept there because Faber conducted experiments on them because they showed immunity to the Flood. Little did Faber know it was a choice the Flood made as part of a larger plan, and that humans weren't actually immune to the parasite. You see, humans actually used to be pretty advanced. They were almost on the same tier as the Forerunners, and the humans had their own war with the Flood, and that war pushed them into retreat and caused them to attack Forerunners, thus causing another war with the Forerunners. So the humans and the Forerunners went at it. Then, against the will of the Forerunner Council and the Librarian herself, Faber actually authorized the capture of humans from Earth who had a special gauge from the Librarian, and transported them back to Zeta Halo. Now you may ask, what the hell is a gauge, Patman? And this is where it gets really crazy and complicated, but try to stick with me. I'm going to explain it as best I can. So basically, the Librarian imposed a genetic command into humans' DNA, which allowed them to subconsciously follow orders or trigger memories of a species' past. It even allowed humans to subconsciously achieve more sophisticated tech like Mjolnir armor or advanced AI like Cortana. These humans were actually allowed to build cities and societies on Zeta Halo, and be really cool if in Halo Infinite we get to see some remains of ancient humanity. So there were some key differences between the original array of Halo rings and the newer array, besides of course the size of the rings. You see, the original 12 Halos were designed to fire laterally, and they would fire out in a cone-shaped field with a maximum effective range of hundreds of thousands of light years, compared to the newer array, which could be fired omnidirectionally or in any direction. galaxian with a radius of 25,000 light years. You see, they were smaller but more efficient, so size doesn't always matter. Now, the older arrays could also be fired in a low power state to really target a certain planet instead of wiping out a whole system. Now, speaking of that, as per Faber and the Forerunners Council authority, Mendicant Bias was tasked with doing a test fire of Zeta Halo near a planet called Cherim Hakur. But this test fire released an ancient being known as the Primordial, who was trapped on this planet. The Primordial was the last of the precursors, a race even more advanced than the Forerunners, who were basically an early form of the Flood. Now, these precursors were actually slaughtered in a war with the Forerunners that took place millions of years before the events of the first Halo game. And they were slaughtered basically just because of a jealous rage by the Forerunners because the precursors favored humanity. But I could cover that in a totally different video. So this Primordial actually turned out to also be a Flood grave mine, which is the highest stage of the Flood's development, making it extremely intelligent and extremely dangerous. And basically is the shared consciousness of the entire Flood species. They're basically a hive mind. So if one little tiny Flood spore survives, it has all those memories and all that knowledge built inside of it until it can eventually turn into a grave mine. So after this Primordial was freed and awakened, Faber ordered it to be transferred to Zeta Halo and be interrogated by Mendicant Bias. After a 43-year chit-chat with Mendicant Bias, the Primordial convinced the AI to turn against the Forerunners, thus infecting Mendicant Bias with the logic plague, causing its rampancy. This Primordial took charge of Zeta Halo and encouraged the Master Builder Faber to continue doing experiments on the humans for no other reason than to satisfy its sadistic amusement. The humans called the research facilities the Palace of Pain because they thought it was actually one location, but it turns out each Halo ring has several different Flood research facilities. See, these life worker beacons on the ring were used to control the humans who had the Geish, basically brainwashing them into their own kidnapping and then being tested on. And this is kind of eerily similar to the Spartan program where kids were kidnapped and tested on to become super soldiers. So after Mendicant Bias sided with the Flood, he broke the safeguards in the Flood containment facilities and allowed the Flood to spread across the ring, covering it in Flood biomass. The ring had then gone missing under the control of a corrupt Mendicant Bias and the Primordial. Faber then used a different Halo ring to basically deal with a rebellion. He was then put on trial for activating this ring at the Forerunner capital world, and the 11 other Halo rings were gathered in orbit at this capital while Zeta Halo remained missing. Finally, during Faber's trial, Zeta Halo and Mendicant Bias reappeared. At the capital, Mendicant then proceeded to control 5 Halo rings and attempt to fire them. One of the 5 was actually destroyed during the battle at the capital, and the 7 that Mendicant couldn't control were sent through a nearby slipspace portal to return to the greater arc. But only one of these rings actually made it through that portal, that being Omega Halo. But by the end of the battle, Mendicant activated Zeta Halo, presumably wiping out all life in the capital's system. After the battle, Zeta Halo retreated into a slipspace portal in a faraway star system. This jump could not be controlled by Mendicant as it was a failsafe to keep the ring from falling into the wrong hands. This failsafe had the ring colliding with a planet in several days. After the retreat into slipspace, the ring began automated repairs. Entire plates of the superstructure were replaced and rebuilt. However, the ring was critically low on power. Then, to enact on his plan to save Zeta Halo, Mendicant enlisted the help of the humans on the ring to manually steer Zeta Halo where the planet would actually pass straight through the center of the ring but still cause severe damage. While this plan was being enacted, the Isodidact appeared, which to save time is basically the Didact's consciousness in another body, and he used a manual override code to shut Mendicant Bias down. To save the ring and allow it to make a slipspace jump on the limited power it had, the Didact commissioned a deconstruction of the damaged pieces while preserving the most important sections of Zeta Halo. So then 2/3 of the superstructure were discarded into space, lowering the diameter of Zeta Halo to 10,000 kilometers, bringing it in line with the new Halo array. Using the remaining power of the installation, the Didact created a slipspace portal, thus transferring the installation to the greater arc, where it would receive repairs and then be recommissioned as part of the newer Halo array. It was here at the greater arc that most of the installation's surviving biological specimens, including humans, were saved by life workers and transferred. Mendicant Bias's core, which was buried deep within the installation, was then deactivated, and the AI itself was forced to undergo a process to correct its rampancy. The Primordial was then captured and placed in a cage within a chamber deep deep underneath the installation's surface, where the Didact interrogated him and then eventually executed it. And here's where it gets interesting. The majority of the Flood, including 10 inactive proto-grave mines, so basically just mini grave mines that would eventually form into a grave mine, and the infected Forerunners remained on the ring, watched over by a number of remaining monitors. Meanwhile, Mendicant Bias was disassembled, and many of his pieces were scattered around the Forerunner Empire, where he would be tested on and further evaluated. It was at these locations, though, that Flood eventually took over, and a grave mine actually restructured Mendicant Bias, and then he once again became the leader of the Flood and led the Flood against the Forerunners in a huge war that lasted hundreds of years. Then, by order of the Didact, Zeta Halo was sent into subspace to a designated location and was to remain a sacred tomb for the millions that died on it. However, it would remain in this location in case it needed to be used as part of the newer Halo array. In the ensuing years of the Flood Forerunner War, all but one of the original 12 rings, not including Zeta Halo, were hunted down and destroyed by the Flood and Mendicant Bias. The only ring that survived was Omega Halo, and that was located at the Greater Arc. It was here at the Greater Arc that the Forerunners would make their final stand against the Flood. Eventually, the Flood would destroy Omega Halo and the Greater Arc, along with most of the Forerunner fleet. Realizing that their defeat was imminent, the Council of Forerunners restored the Master Builder Faber to command, as he was the only one who really knew how to stop the Flood, which was of course using the Halo array. But he was the only one that knew the location of the new Lesser Arc, which created the newer rings. And so he finally told the ISO Didact where it was and ordered him there. So the ISO Didact Offensive Bias, which was basically a countermeasure to Mendicant Bias, a new AI, and the remaining Forerunners headed to the Lesser Arc, along with the surviving biological specimens from the Greater Arc. A final naval battle ensued, where Offensive Bias was tasked with trying to hold off Mendicant and the Flood for as long as possible for the Halo array to fire. Of course, Offensive was successful in this, and the new Halo array was fired, thus pushing the galactic reset button and sending the galaxy into a time of darkness. Whew, I know that was an earful, guys, and I just wanted to say thank you if you've made it this far in the video. I really appreciate it. I really hope I helped you guys have a better understanding of the backstory of the Halo array, more specifically Zeta Halo, because it's going to have a huge impact on Halo Infinite's story, and there will be other videos in this series, but this video was necessary just so we could get the lore out the way so we can make some Halo Infinite story predictions in the next video. Now do me a favor and send this to any of your friends that think Halo has a boring or generic story. I'm looking at you, Crump. Send them this video, show them how much backstory there is to Halo. And this is just one subject. There is so much more in the extended universe, and that's what makes Halo so great to me and why I love it so much. What I want you guys to do is leave a comment down below pertaining to Zeta Halo and how it could relate to Halo Infinite. Let's get some fan theories started. Let's get a discussion started. I'll be in the comments section interacting with you guys. I appreciate you all, and until the next video, peace.